Hello and welcome to WION World is One. I am Ghadi Francis and this is the West Asia Post, our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates, stories and news from a region that I call my home, West Asia. Today our top story is about two nations once thought to be very close allies. The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia seem to be drifting apart, while Yemen war and oil production are being reported as the latest flashpoints. Their differences go way deeper than that. Our next report decodes all about this. Take a look. They are still allies formally, but the rift seems to be growing. We are talking about Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The roots of the rift between the two Arabian powers are complicated but rooted in myriad geopolitical factors. Foreign investment, influence in global oil markets, and the Yemen war are just some of the flashpoints between the two nations. So what is new this time? Disagreements that used to happen behind closed doors are now out in the open. If reports are to be believed, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman gave a miss to a summit of Middle East leaders hosted by Abu Dhabi in January. In December, the UAE's top leaders skipped a high-profile China-Arab summit in Riyadh.
We are in a competitive market.
In UAE, Sheikh Mohammed's place, the ruler of the small emirate of Fujairah attended the summit featuring Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The event was attended by the rulers of Jordan, Egypt, Qatar, and others. There are at least 4 major points of disagreement between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi when it comes to regional affairs. The signing of Abraham Accords between UAE and Israel in 2020. Saudi thinks the agreement marked a major triumph for Israeli efforts to become integrated into the Arab world without any real concessions to the Palestinians. Second, Abu Dhabi's support for the Southern Transitional Council in southern Yemen has been another major source of contention. The withdrawal of its forces in 2019 is also a point of concern for Riyadh. Third is the UAE believing the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad must be fully reintegrated into the Arab world's diplomatic fold. But the Saudi leadership is not on board, at least not yet. And we saw a glimpse of that when Arab delegation visited Damascus last week and met the Syrian president. The delegation's visit came just weeks after 2 powerful earthquakes rocked Turkey and Syria and left at least 50,000 dead. And the fourth point of clash being the disagreement over the capacity of oil pumping by UAE. The UAE is obligated to pump much less oil than it is capable of, hurting its revenue. It has long pushed to pump more oil, but the Saudis have said no so far. The potential of this escalating is real this time. What will take some time to better understand is how the Emirati-Saudi alliance would be impacted by the UAE possibly exiting OPEC, an idea that has been discussed for years in UAE without any action so far, although reports indicate that such claims are far from true. Regardless of the UAE's future in OPEC, it seems safe to assume that the improvement in relations with Oman and Qatar has come just at the right time for Saudi Arabia, as its ties with Abu Dhabi are under significant strain. The tensions between Saudi and the UAE are not new, but have been building up for years. Much of it also stems from the UAE's determination to chart an independent course in regional and international issues. The differences expose the gaps between the leaders of these two Arabian powerhouses, UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. As Saudi Arabia and the UAE attempt to diversify their economy away from oil, follow similar economic models, and find themselves competing in the fields of tourism and investments, it is also making them compete, often leading them to come in each other's way. Historically, the UAE has been a reliable ally of Saudi Arabia, even though the Saudis and the Emiratis continue to participate in joint military exercises and have other shared interests. Observers are of the view that the Saudi-Emirati alliance could be in serious trouble. West Asia Bureau, WION. World is one. This and much more is lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post. But first, let's take a look at what's making the headlines across the region.
3 wounded in Tel Aviv shooting attack. A Palestinian gunman opens fire in Tel Aviv, wounding 3 people before being killed by police amid rising unrest in the West Bank. Turkish opposition parties declare Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu as a candidate against President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in the upcoming May election. Kuwaiti Emir reappoints Sheikh Ahmad Nawaf al-Sabah as Prime Minister and assigns him to nominate members of the new government. A group of Yemeni nationals file a lawsuit in the US against defense contractors Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and General Dynamics, accusing them of aiding war crimes in Yemen. Saudi Arabia is set to introduce yoga in its universities across the country, announces Saudi Yoga Committee President.
Now to Palestine. Tensions are high again in the West Bank. 10 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces just last week. Now this happened as the US Defense Secretary was visiting Israel and calling for calm. Our next report tells you more.
Three Palestinians were shot dead by Israeli border police in the West Bank on Thursday. Earlier, during a raid on Tuesday, 7 Palestinians were killed by Israeli military in Jenin. All this while US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was visiting Israel on Thursday. Reports said that Austin and the Israeli Prime Minister discussed escalating violence in West Bank among other issues. West Bank has witnessed a flare-up in attacks and raids since Israel's new far-right government took office in December last year. The shooting of 2 Israeli brothers last month in the West Bank triggered an attack by Jewish settlers in Hawara. Israeli settlers killed a Palestinian man and torched dozens of houses and cars during the rampage. Even though the attack triggered worldwide outrage, there has been no sign of any let-up in the violence ahead of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Israeli ministers have repeatedly given calls for violence against Palestinians. The rising spiral of violence saw foreign ministers from the Arab world meeting in Cairo to discuss the situation.
The Israeli government is encouraging a dangerous culture of impunity regarding the aggression towards Palestinians within their citizens, and the whole world has witnessed the crimes of burning houses and belongings that was practiced by settlers who were blinded by extremism and hatred in Hawara. And we have seen all of that happening within full view and under the protection of the Israeli rightist government.
Israeli forces have conducted regular raids across the West Bank for the last few months. Since the start of the year, at least 75 Palestinians have been killed, including fighters and civilians. Over the same period, 13 Israelis have been killed in attacks by Palestinians. By current reckoning, any let-up in the violence seems unlikely.
We do have a lot to talk about today.
Whether Austin's visit leads to any de-escalation remains to be seen.
Now, among the Israelis, what started as a protest against judicial reforms is now becoming a rebellion against the Netanyahu government. The question is, will Benjamin Netanyahu be able to make it? Where will this take the Israeli government? Our next report tells you all about that.
Rebellion against the Israeli ruling coalition of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is growing. The day of resistance protests on Thursday over the government's judicial overhaul forced US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to delay his arrival in Israel. Besides, Austin's visit was confined to a location within the airport grounds due to the judicial reform protests. Netanyahu and his defense minister went to the airport area to meet Austin. And worse, Netanyahu had to take a helicopter to go to the airport in order to avoid the protesters. But protesters on the streets are not Netanyahu's only worry. Earlier reports said that Israel's national airline, El Al, had a difficult time finding pilots to fly Netanyahu to Italy because apparently the pilots too are protesting against his hardline coalition. The airline denied such reports, but the Prime Minister travelled to Italy in a smaller plane instead of the larger Boeing 777. That is how bad the situation in Israel is, and there is more. Nearly 40 reservist fighter pilots in an elite Israeli force squadron have refused to attend training in protest against the government. The move is seen as an unprecedented one by observers. Reacting to the reports, Netanyahu said that the threats to refuse military service endanger Israel's existence.
כשאנו נלחמים בשדה הקרב ומסתכלים ימינה ושמאלה,
it rests on the deep understanding that whatever the differences between us, we are always united in the face of those who seek to kill us. This was the case throughout all of Israel's wars. Regardless of the struggles and disagreements among us, refusal threatens this existential foundation.
So what is happening in Israel? The current Netanyahu-led coalition has been in office for a little over 2 months, and the Prime Minister's troubles began less than a week after that, with his cabinet minister's visit to Al-Aqsa Mosque. Since then, frequent violence in the West Bank, a recent settler attack in Huara, protests over judicial reforms, friction within the coalition, and the weakening of the shekel have been matters of constant worry. As soon as the Israeli government announced the judicial reform plan, a sense of alarm spread across the country. Israel has seen weekly protests and sometimes more frequently, bringing hundreds of thousands of Israelis out on the streets screaming against the judicial reforms. With Netanyahu's ultra-orthodox and extreme-right coalition partners adamant on staying the course, the Prime Minister seems to be on the brink. There is alarm in the business community as well. Worried central bankers have urged Israeli politicians to slow down. Some technology firms have said that they're moving their money out of the country as they see the judicial reforms as an assault on democracy. But the problem for Netanyahu is not just within Israel. Israel's closest ally, the United States, is also concerned over the recent happenings in Israel. The unending violence in the West Bank, provocative statements of ministers, and the government's push to reform the judiciary have rung alarm bells in Washington. According to reports, invitations for Netanyahu to visit the United States and the UAE have been kept in abeyance as discomfort with the Israeli government is rising. Both Washington and Abu Dhabi are reportedly waiting to see what unfolds during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which begins in late March, before proceeding with plans to host Netanyahu. So what is next for Israel and Netanyahu is anybody's guess. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
Top Pentagon official Lloyd Austin paid a surprise visit to Iraq. Now, what does this visit signify when the country is approaching its 20th anniversary of the US-led invasion? We tell you more.
Iraq had an unannounced high-profile visitor this week, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Austin, a former commanding general of U.S. forces in Iraq, is the highest-ranking member of U.S. President Joe Biden's administration to visit the country. The timing of the visit is surprising and interesting. It comes barely 2 weeks before the 20th anniversary of the US-led invasion of Iraq, a war that toppled Saddam Hussein and led to the deaths of tens of thousands of Iraqi civilians. Just after landing in Baghdad, Austin said he was visiting Iraq to reaffirm the strategic partnership toward a more secure, stable, and sovereign Iraq. He also met Iraq's Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani. This comes even as the US's role in Iraq has remained controversial. After the invasion in 2003, the US withdrew its forces in 2011. But 3 years later, the Obama administration sent thousands of soldiers back into Iraq and neighboring Syria, ostensibly to fight against the Islamic State. And then the Trump administration sought to withdraw its forces from Syria, using Iraq as a base. However, in 2019, Iran-Iraq heated up with dozens of attacks on facilities hosting U.S. forces. In 2022, the killing of IRGC Quds force head Qasem Soleimani and Iraqi Kataib Hezbollah leader Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis in Baghdad proved to be a game-changer for the region. Since then, the U.S. has shifted many units to the Iraqi Kurdistan region. Officially, the US is in Iraq at the latter's invitation, but in reality, Iraq hosts a critical base for the US for another reason: its forces in Syria. Iraq has about 2,500 US troops in the country, while about 900 are based in Kurdish-controlled northeast Syria. So, what really is the motive behind the U.S. Defense Secretary's visit? Austin, who also oversaw the withdrawal of U.S. troops between 2010 and 2011, really knows the region. Observers see Austin's visit as a reminder of a strong American presence in the region, at a time when Washington wants to counter Iranian and Chinese influence. Since the US-led coalition troops ousted Saddam's Sunni Arab-dominated regime, Iraq's Shiite majority has led Iraq under a confessional power-sharing system. Successive governments have tried to balance ties with Iran. Iran is crucial as it holds influence over the Hashd al-Shabi, a group of militias in Iraq that are now paramilitaries and receive salaries from the Iraqi government. Iraq is seen as near abroad by Iran and obviously wants the US forces out of the country. So in a way, Austin's visit is a reminder to Iran and the wider region of the US role in Iraq. In the run-up to the invasion anniversary, Iraq has been hosting a raft of foreign dignitaries, including UN Chief Antonio Guterres and the Iranian, Russian, and Saudi foreign ministers.
And now to Iran. Iran's mystery over poisoning of schoolgirls continue. While the Islamic Republic has announced that it is arresting some of the people involved, no details have emerged about who is behind that and what their motive is. Our next report tries to decode the case. Take a look.
It started in November last year, and over the past few months, hundreds of schoolgirls in Iran have been poisoned. But Iranian authorities seem to be clueless about who is behind it or what chemicals have been used, if any. The mystery poisoning that reportedly started in the city of Qom has spread to 25 of Iran's 31 provinces. Iranian media reports have put the number of affected schools at over 60. The affected students have complained of symptoms ranging from shortness of breath to nausea and vertigo after reporting unpleasant odors on school premises.
The students all felt the same symptoms as me. They had coughs. Some of them said their eyes burned, and most of them were scared.
It is no surprise that Iranian officials only acknowledged them in recent weeks. It was only on Tuesday that Iran's Deputy Interior Minister announced the first arrest. However, he did not identify those detained or elaborate on any possible motive. Iran has so far failed to come up with a convincing explanation of the incident. One theory is that it could be the doing of possible hardliners. This viewpoint has been floated by a few Iranian ministers and officials. Some sections of Iranian media have cited a supposed communique from a group called WION The World, which said that education of girls is considered forbidden. The group has allegedly threatened to spread the poisoning of girls throughout Iran if girls' schools remain open. Iranian officials have not acknowledged any such group though. A senior journalist from Iran, Jamileh Kadewar, has also pointed to a possibility of mass hysteria. Sensing anger in the country, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has called for the perpetrators to be punished harshly.
Because this is not a small crime. This is a crime against the most innocent part of society, meaning children, and is causing fear and insecurity in the minds of society and concerns families. These are not small matters. These must be seriously pursued.
However, Iran's president, Ebrahim Raisi, has given it a twist. Raisi has said it is a conspiracy by foreign enemies of the Islamic Republic. Though he did not name any country, Iran has regularly accused Western powers and Israel of being behind unrest within its borders. The schoolgirls' poisoning incident has sparked international concern and Western calls for an independent investigation. Some activists have accused the establishment of orchestrating the poisonings to avenge the protests. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has called for a transparent investigation into the incident. This is not the first time that such an incident has taken place in Iran. In 2014, there was a wave of acid attacks after which people took to the streets in the city of Isfahan. The attacks appeared to be aimed at terrorizing women who violated the strict Islamic dress code. Nobody was ever arrested or punished. Iranian authorities have a poor record of investigating violence against women and girls. Fears have been expressed that it may be no different this time. The recent poisonings have come at a critical time for Iran's ruling elite. For the first time since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, schoolgirls have been joining the protests that spiraled after Mahsa Amini's death. The 22-year-old woman died in police custody after she was arrested by morality police in September last year. Since then, there have been regular protests against the hijab rules and the government. The question being asked is, will Iran investigate the poisoning, trace the culprits, and bring them to book? West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
And now, as usual, ending on a happy note. A 10-year-old boy in Syria survived the earthquake. He was rescued from the debris of his home and he had one wish to tell the rescuers. Now, his wish became true. Our next report is all smiles and hugs. Take a look. That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, always bringing you the most recent updates, ground reports and stories from the most volatile region in the world. Until then, stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis, coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon, and you're watching WION World is One.